Hello, and welcome to the Save Our Children podcast. We're your hosts, Becky and Bridget. Today on our show, we have survivor Madi. She has a heroic story of being adopted from Colombia, coming to America to live the American dream her parents thought they were giving her, and ending up in a nightmare of a family. Over many decades, she's worked through the pain and trauma her adoptive family caused with her strength and God. She's written a book called I Broke the Chain, An American Dream or the Perfect Lie, that beautifully describes her life and led to how she's worked to overcome her past. I highly recommend reading this book, and we'll link it below in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today. To get started, can you please give our listeners just a brief history of yourself?
Yes. As you had mentioned, my name is Madi Neli. So that was my birth name. And when I was adopted, my adopted family gave me Maria. And as we get to talking, you will see how I came about finding out Madi Neli. So I have stuck with Madi Neli since I found out.
Yay.
And I am from Colombia. I was adopted when I was 2 years old. I'm Spanglish, I guess you can say. I'm not bilingual, but I am Spanglish. And I'm 48 years old and I'm a grandma, and life is good now, but it took a lot of work to get where I'm at.
Definitely. And I know too, your book, you're very open and transparent. And the title I personally love because everyone always thinks that whole American dream. And then listening to the survivors and looking at the reality of the world right now, and then from a survivor standpoint, really does open your mind. And there's some things where you can't fathom and you're like, is this really happening? And some people don't want to believe it and turn a blind eye to it. So definitely it's survivors like you who have used your voice, turned to God, and helping other survivors heal as well, and let them know that they're not alone. So thank you for your courageous voice and being a voice for the voiceless.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. So that title that you speak of, actually, we were on a vacation at the time when I was still writing my book. And I wanted to come up with something that I knew would just tie. And at each time I was like, no, that's not the title. That's not the title. And it was my husband, my youngest daughter. We were just throwing ideas. And I said, I want to make it sound like exactly the way my book is. We came to America, right? And my father, my biological father, had a dream for us. And so I really, honestly, I think it took the three of us to kind of just put words out there. And I'll tell you what, when it came together, it was mind blowing. It was like, okay, this is it. And right away I wrote to my publisher and I told her, I said, this is it. I don't know. I think I sent the email like right away, off my phone and everything. And I was like, this is what it's going to be, before I forgot it.
Yeah, exactly. Because I'd be like, what was it again?
So we tried to find something that really tied the book together. And yeah, like you said, it's everybody thinks America, and what do they think? It's pot of gold. It's nothing happens, stuff like this. And it does. We unfortunately have to deal with the same things they do in other countries.
Yeah.
So can you tell our listeners, so at 2 years old, your father said, I need these kids to have a better life, and I'm going to send them to America. Can you explain briefly just your childhood? I know, like you mentioned in the book, you brought up with some of your sisters.
Yes. So my biological family, so there was 12 of us, including my mom, and my dad was 14. Very poor, very hardworking. From what I hear about my mom, she was just like amazing. And she tried to keep all of us together. She tried to keep the family together. My biological father was the same way. However, they say that he had, I don't know if it was mental illness or what it was, but he did. He loved us the best he could. He never hurt us. He didn't do anything like that. But he would kind of throw us out. I guess he would get mad and throw my my biological mom out with us kids, and we would just be outside, and he wouldn't let us back in. And the missionaries that were involved with our family, they were the ones that would help, and they would try to feed us, and they would keep us as much as they could, you know. They also had a budget of their own. So from what I understand, my biological mom got pregnant and with it was the last set of twins. And unfortunately, she didn't make it. After the babies were born, she didn't make it. So that left my biological father with all of us. So that's how it all started. I'm not sure exactly how old I was when I went into an orphanage, but we were put into an orphanage for a while. So then we could be found families here in America.
Wow.
Yeah.
I
So from
haven't
what
got
I've
the
been,
book yet, so I'm excited to read it. Becky, I know for sure has. So this is the first time I'm hearing your full story, other than what I've seen on
okay.
social media.
Yeah. So then from what I was told is that then we were put on, basically we were put on like the radio, that they were looking for families for us, that there was 5 of us, because it was the 5 youngest, the twins included, and then me and my 3 other sisters. So yeah, 5 of us together.
Mhm.
And of course, I mean, we do have brothers and sisters, but they couldn't take care of us. We're all poor. They were trying to make it too, you
Right.
know?
Right. So how old were you when you came to live with your adoptive family?
So I was 2 years old.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, so I'm not, the part of me being put into an orphanage, I really can't say how long I was there.
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
call anybody telling us how long, but we had been there for a little bit.
Mhm.
And then when we were adopted, and of course I was 2, and that's how my story begins. It was just, wow, traumatic. I mean, you know, now that I am older and have fully recovered from it, and I have fully been able to just look back on it, I just see, wow, it was traumatic, constant turmoil. I mean, it was a lot. It was a lot that was being thrown at me and my sisters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially as you get older and you're in a situation like that, and then you have your siblings. It's like just processing it and the mental aspect of it, that alone is overwhelming. And then having an adopted family and then wondering, like, what happened to me? Like, why did they ever explain to you, like, once you were with your adopted family, did you go to them and get answers about your biological family?
Probably.
So we were told, so when I was between 7 and 8 years old is when I found out I actually was adopted. And so, but I wasn't clear about our biological family. I knew that we had brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
I knew that my mom had passed on. I knew that my biological father, so we were told that he had passed on. Okay, later to come to find out years later, I think it was about 1989 that he had passed on. And I would have been, okay, so if I came to America when I was 2, that was in 1976. So in 1989, he had passed on. All that time, you know, from the time that I could remember, that we were told he was gone, that he wasn't even alive.
And,
Wow.
and the part of this story that is the hardest to understand is that her adoptive family was the abuser in all of this, that her adoptive family, along with her 2 biological sisters and other adopted sister, they were treated horribly, and as if they were indentured servants, as if they were slaves to the family. And that's where the crazy part of it is that these people adopted these children and then treated them so horribly. And I know that you speak in your book about how your adoptive mother had many mental illnesses and different things, or I mean, yeah, some of that you have to be the type of person you are. But that's that's where a lot of the story comes in is yes, you were adopted out. Your dad had to put you up for adoption and you were brought to America. And he is, for like what you say, he was thinking he was giving you the dream that everybody wants to come to America. And like, I can't take care of you guys anymore. And this is the hardest thing that I'll ever do. But man, you're going to go to America. And America is the place of dreams. And America is this absolutely awesome situation, and nothing bad will happen to you. And then you literally end up in hell in America.
Mhm.
And people don't realize, especially here, that because one part that was really poignant to me was when you all went to church and not one
Mhm.
person in the town had any clue that you were not the perfect American family. And look at this couple who adopted these 4 girls and how amazing are they, and blah, blah, blah. And then you would literally go home and be beaten. And there's actually a story going around right now, I think in someone in Arizona, that they have adopted, I believe, someone from Africa, and they're now calling this family out because they're doing the same thing to her. And people are now starting to see it, where it's like, no, if you actually know and look behind the curtain, you'll see how much different they're treating their adoptive kids versus their real kids. And so I was excited to read your story, not excited in a good way, but excited to read your story, because it really related to that's actually happening. And we've got to stop assuming that just because people adopt kids or just because people look good on the outside, that they actually are.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And you know, the part that you brought up about church and stuff, and even as going to church, they would throw underwear on our head and they would be calling us names. And okay, so you know, back then the station wagons, you know, they were long, and so we were all crammed in the back. So there was 4 of us in the back trunk of it, and they would be calling us names. They would, you know, like throw stuff at us. You know, have underwear on her head. I mean, it was crazy. And as soon as we pulled up into that parking lot, they would tell us, take your underwear off your head. We literally sit out in a church parking lot, and they would get us to look like everything was fine. And we all would walk in this line and go sit down. I mean, it was just like, who does that? Who does that? It's, even though I lived it, I still look back, and just like you, I sit there and think that's crazy. Like, who does that? Like, that's beyond psychotic, you know? It's crazy.
Yeah,
It's
and that's
just,
the stuff that I will never understand and can't fathom is some of the things that are happening to the children, whether it's in the foster care system, CPS, even all the way up through the trafficking with the elite and the satanic ritual abuse. It's like, who can hurt an innocent child? Like, how? I will never understand that. I can't fathom half of the things that the survivors have been through. And people will still call you a conspiracy theorist and say all of these things about the survivors. And that's the one part that we truly struggle with and are tired of, is watching the survivors get attacked, because it
right,
happens. It's like, who are you to tell them what happened to them isn't true? And
right,
it's like, you don't know the trauma. Everyone has their own trauma, and you shouldn't belittle that survivor or make them feel that their voice isn't enough and that they can't be heard. And so when I found your story on social media, it really opened my eyes. And I told the girls, Emma and Becky, I was like, we have to reach out and let her know she's not alone, because this happens to so many people, and it's happening in America as well. And that's one thing so many people turn a blind eye to. And going back to the whole selling the American dream and the foster care system, myself, when I was looking at, I haven't fully told my whole birth story on our own podcast, but it's on my old post from on my own social media. But when I had my daughter and I had her at home by myself, And so I was going through, young mom, didn't know what to do, didn't know how I was going to take care of her, didn't know, literally just had her on my normal menstrual cycle date. So it was a shock in itself. And then me and my baby dad weren't together, and it was just a whole lot going on mentally. And so then I was going to work full time, school full time. And so I had looked at the options of, when I was in the hospital, my parents had me taken to the hospital to check me and the baby out to make sure everything was okay. So when that happened, I was in a lot of counseling. Mentally, I wasn't all there. And it would actually be interesting to go back and look at my hospital documents today, because I would want to, now knowing what I know in CPS and all of the social service aspect, I would want to know the documentation side of the conversations I was even having with them, because that part to me is a whole blur. I just know I had
Yes.
that whole part, like, now knowing what I know now and looking at the options of receiving home, adoption, and keeping my child and taking care of her, looking at those three options now would be totally different from everything I know today. So just know that it's happening in America as well. And we have DCS and the social services on site in the hospitals who are trafficking these children and literally getting taken straight from the mom. And so me as a young mom, being panicked, freaking out, my daughter did go to a receiving home, because mentally I was not all there. And I was like, how am I going to do this? And I didn't really want anyone's help. And me and her dad, he wasn't helping. And so I was just like, how am I going to do this? So long story short, when I was looking at the adoption process, they literally give you the 3-ring prong binders, and they paint and they sell the perfect family in all these pictures. So there was a point where I was going through counseling, and she was at a receiving home. Within the first 24 hours, literally, it started happening, and families were getting thrown at me. While they knew I was my most vulnerable, didn't know what I was going to do, families were being handed to me, and they're like, you can literally pick an adoption. You can pick every check mark, whether it's the religion, the hair color, the color eyes, like, you can pick your perfect child when going through adoption, and your perfect family that you want for your child. You can pick all of that. And it was the craziest thing to see on paper, and seeing, yeah, I want a smoking family. No, I don't want a smoking family. Like, literally they pinpoint it all. So what happened was, and as well as religion. And so what happened was, when I was going through all these folders that they just gave to me just because I wanted to see, I was like, what is this? Once they found out that she was like the perfect child, no health conditions or anything like that, all of a sudden more families got put at the top of the list. So I was like, what is this? I was like, so then in my mind, I'm like, how much are they? I started doing research. I'm like, how much are they profiting off of these children? Like, what are these people paying for adoption? And so that really opened my eyes. And I was like, I'm not selling my child. And to me, it was something totally against me, because then when I was in counseling, I had to write a letter, and I couldn't do it. And when writing a letter, you had to write, because if you wanted an open adoption or a closed adoption, if you wanted an open adoption, you could still stay in contact with, oh, I hate talking about this part. You can still stay in contact with the family. So what happens is, sorry. So what happens is, then you have to write a letter to your daughter. And so that's the reason why I asked about, like, if they ever told you about your biological family, because well, for me, it would have been my daughter. So you would have to write a letter saying why you did adoption and chose that option. So for me, I couldn't do it. Like, it broke me. And then I thought of all the other kids ever reading that letter, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I couldn't do it. I felt like I was selling my child and all that. I could not do it. And then it also brought me back to thinking and putting myself in one of my cousin's shoes. And she was adopted. And she was adopted by my aunt, but nobody ever knew. And we thought she was our cousin all along. Well, then family being family, they had a situation. And so once she got older, someone made a joke and was like, no, that's really your sister. And everyone's like, what? And so then the truth finally came out, and they all sat her down, both of them. We had to go to our parents and be like, what do you mean that's her sister? And so then it was like, yeah, your aunt adopted her from your other aunt. So then we got the whole truth. And so it was like all along they were sisters, but they thought they were cousins. And so then we had a family adoption. And so then it just brought me back to like the conversations of like with my family. And that was one of the biggest fights, where it was like one of my brothers were like, if you do this, I'm going to adopt her. Or my parents were like, I'm going to adopt her. Like, we're keeping in the family. So then it just brought all of that and that whole emotional aspect. And I was like, oh my gosh, no. So then I have my daughter and I take care of her full time. I have full custody of her. But that part is always like, when reading stories like this and looking at the survivors aspect and knowing that I had to possibly write one of those letters, it's like, did the kid ever really get that when they were at a certain age? Did they ever tell them about their parents? And was that the perfect family on paper? And here they're selling it in this book like it's the perfect family. And it's like, you don't really know that person. But CPS and all of these services, including the churches, it was a Christian church where she went to the receiving home. It was like a Christian organization. And so they're all in on it. And so it's just really mind blowing and opening to see what I know now versus what I knew when I was 19, 20, and making that decision. And then my parents always told me, well, don't make a decision now based on your emotions. That's something you might regret later on in life. So.
Right. So you speak about the part about you gave up your daughter for adoption, right? So
no,
your daughter.
I didn't.
Oh, you didn't.
I didn't give her up for adoption, but I went through that process while she was at a receiving home. They gave me adoption paperwork, and where like, if you decide to go this route, you can look at these families. And they just kept putting books in front of me to look at. And I just looked at them because it's like, what is this? And I was curious about the whole adoption process and all of that. And so I didn't give her up for adoption, but I did look at that process when she was at a receiving home and in counseling. The counseling part, they put it in front of me and we're like, well, here, as they were helping me process through everything mentally, that was one of the things that they put in front of me. And then I had to write a letter. I had counseling, like activities I had to do. And one of them in my journal was writing her a letter of why, if I made that decision, why I would. If I wanted an open adoption, they would then still it and give it to her when she was older. And so then she would know why I chose that decision. So she would have an explanation for herself. And so that's the part I couldn't do. And so when they gave me that within the first 24 to 48 hours, under 48 hours, that's the part that I was like, no, we have to go get her. So I pulled her out of a receiving home and I signed my custody rights and everything back over solely to myself. And then I had to go through the family court process and all of that with her dad. And then I have sole custody now.
Right. Right. So I can relate. Actually, that's part of my book later in my journey after, I'm sure you already read about this part, Becky, about so I had a son. I was a teen mom. And of course, I mean, through everything that I had been through, I was messed up. I mean, I couldn't be a mom and I knew it. And so, yes, I had to. I eventually gave him up for adoption. Now, at first, it wasn't something that came to my mind. I thought, okay, you know what, I can do it. I'll do it. But the home that I was put into was I was supposed to have been receiving help. You know, I was supposed to have been, you know, like basically the foster mom was supposed to have been co-parenting with me, and that didn't happen. She left everything to me, and at that point she was involved with some guy she was dating and something like that, so she would leave me alone with the baby. Thank God I never did anything to that baby, because I was like, that baby would cry, that baby would, I mean, scream, the baby would, I didn't know what I was doing. And eventually it came to the point that one of my other sisters somehow got a hold of me while I was in this home, and I just broke down and I said, I don't know what I'm doing. And she heard the baby screaming and crying. And I said, this is the way it's been. And I think it was close to a month before I even got any type of anybody to listen to me and to know that I couldn't handle this baby. And so, yes, I do understand the whole process of going through the adoption and going through all of that. Now, however, for me, thank goodness, I actually did end up with a really good agency. One of my aunts, she actually helped me get in connected. It was called Hope for Families, or Hope something. But they really were very tender with me. And I think because at that time too, I was such an emotional, my state was awful. It was just, it wasn't there. I wasn't, but my aunt was able to walk me through everything. They would come in there and they would talk with me. But yes, they do. They rush that part about you have to pick the family, because they seem to think you can't be with that baby longer than what you need to be, because it's what they call it, it's traumatic. I forget the word that they use, but I had already been with the baby for a little bit. So it wasn't like that part. The part was letting him go. Oh my goodness, I have a picture and I had put it up on Instagram. It was a while back. I have a picture of me holding him. And when I look at that picture, I mean, my eyes were so swollen. I just looked like I had been crying for and my heart was broken. I mean, it was broken, but I knew I had to do that. If not, I don't know. I can't say. I probably would have ended up doing something to that baby, because guys, I wasn't there. I wasn't.
You were only
wow.
Like 14, right? 14 or 15?
Yeah, and it was 15. So,
I mean,
and I had already been through so much before that. And I mean, yeah, it had help, but it wasn't the counseling that I needed. It was that I had years later. I had only had counseling here and there. I mean, it wasn't like, but I was messed up. I was just not, I couldn't have been a mom. There's no way.
Right.
There's no way.
There's so many young moms, and we always talk about it. We're like, could you imagine if there's actually resources and people there to help? Because there's no guide to parenting. Like, even us being moms today, like, we don't know it all. And so we always stress about turning to one another and learning from one another, and really just having that open, transparent relationship with your own families and your own friends, and turning to one another for that guidance and for counseling. Yeah, you can go to a counselor, but a counselor only knows and can help you with what you're willing to tell them and what you're comfortable with. There's some counselors who, even when you're going through their activities, there's some counselors, like I know for one of the ones that I first went to, and I was in counseling for a while, I was physically there, but mentally I was checked out. I can't tell you any of those conversations, let alone like the up and down emotional roller coaster within the first 2 years of having her, and mentally that whole aspect of it. And just going through counseling, some of those places, they treat you like you're crazy or that you need to go into like a psych ward. So the minute that I felt where I was like, okay, why? Like, because there's times where you don't want to go, where you don't have the appetite to eat. You don't have the appetite to even, some days you can't even get up. And so you have those moments where there's sometimes you don't even want to talk to people, but it's like, I'm forcing myself to go to this. So once I got to the part where I was like, why am I going here? Like, they treat me like I need to go put in a psych ward, to where I shut down and didn't want to tell them anything. Because now I'm like, oh God, what if they're going to take my kid from me? Because now I'm telling them all this and I'm opening up and the trauma and all of that. So just that whole experience alone, I'm like, that whole mental aspect, what happens now if they take my kid from me? So I took myself out of the counseling aspect and was like, you know what? I'm going to turn to somebody who I know is going to be open and honest with me and can see both aspects of it and not be judgmental. So then that's what I did for myself. But yeah, the whole process of it, mentally in itself is a lot.
Yeah, it's
But
overwhelming.
it makes you,
And then,
it makes you stronger. Like definitely for me,
yes, it does.
all of that is what I will say is what made me who I am today and stronger for everything.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
One of the things that Bridget, you just touched on and was written in your book, is this idea that nobody really knows what's in your mind. And
Mhm.
everybody, and this goes again with the folks who are homeless or foster kids or wherever we are, that there's this assumption that they're just being naughty, or they're just being defiant, or they're just they want to live alone, or they want to do whatever. And there's a very huge canyon-sized disconnect that these folks have trauma and injury and pain that is so deep that they don't want to talk about it yet, or they can't talk about it yet, or the only way that you get attention is by ruining things or yelling at people or making a scene. And although everybody knows that's not the best way, there isn't another way. There isn't coping done. There isn't any of these things done. And that's where you see a lot of people in today's society. Well, they're just a troubled person. They want to live on the street. They just want, no, nobody wants to be treated inhumanely or unjustly or what, but did you ever, I mean, and sometimes you can't say, so what's your story? Because they're not ready to talk about it, or they can't talk about it. But everybody's trauma is their trauma. And we as a society have got to learn to step out of our own comfort, reach across the aisle to love each other, because you don't know what that person has been through. And just looking at their behavior, that behavior could be an absolute cry for help and love and something that both of you had literally just talked about was, I don't even know what happened in that amount of time because I wasn't ready to deal with it.
Yeah. Mhm, for sure. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you on how many times I was looked at like that, like, oh, she's just trying to get attention. Oh, she's just trying to, she's being dramatic, or that isn't what happened. My adopted family, when all this started coming out and I finally did the last runaway, their words were to the police officers were that we were ungrateful. We were ungrateful adopted children, that we were spoiled, and that we were just making things more than what they were. And it basically, we just wanted attention. That's what it was. But yet the police officers saw the bruising on us. They saw there was evidence still, but yet my adopted family still thought that none of that was from them. It wasn't, but the bruising is not your typical bruising.
Right.
A
It wasn't
typical
kid
bruising when
bruising,
somebody
like,
just falls.
right,
Of
right.
course.
When you have
Yes.
a hand
Yeah.
mark on, yeah.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So no, yes, I do. I get that. I used to get that. Yeah. I used to get that even when I was in the mental institutions. I used to get a lot of that. Maria, why are you acting like that today? You know better than that. You should not. But you know what? At that time, I didn't know better. I
Right.
didn't know what I was supposed to be acting like. All I knew is to be angry. That's all I knew, because that's all I had ever seen. I knew to burst out. I
Mhm.
knew, because guess what? I learned it from the adults that were around me.
Yeah.
That's just the way it was, and that was, I mean, yeah, it was. I didn't know how to, I didn't know how to act. I really didn't. I had no manners. I really didn't.
You
know?
literally just had to survive. I mean, you talk about how you were stealing bread, and the four of you would have a whole code on when you could come out to get it or do whatever. And if you didn't have food, you would eat the dog food. I mean, so again, you
Yeah.
look at you look at someone's history, you look at your history, and you're like, well, yeah, I can imagine that you're very angry, but I can also see from the, like, stepping back, seeing from the outside, looking at the people who thought they were helping you and having no
Yes.
clue what just happened. You're like, well, you lived in this adoptive family that were great to you, even though nobody knew that, and that wasn't the case at all. They're thinking
Yeah.
you had a perfect life. You came from, I mean, it's an American dream. You're living in here, you're doing this, and now you're acting like this. What the hell? Why are you doing that? That's not
Yeah.
the case. And so being
Right.
able to really look at it and have a better understanding, because had somebody, and I knew it's not up to you to have told these people, but had somebody who was an adult looked into this while you were still just a child, your care would have been much different than the idea of she's just acting out or she's acting crazy.
For sure. Yeah,
You still want to
for
do that.
sure. Yeah. It's so I had an aunt, so it would have been my adopted father, his brother, them, my aunt and my uncle. Later, they had told us, they said that they they were like, they were suspicious of things, but they couldn't really narrow it, so they had a feeling. They just because they would, okay, for instance, they would say, can let us take the girls for the summer, or let us go, and it was always no, no, no. Or when they would try to, if they thought that they were going to come and talk to us, or we were very, they would cut us off really quick, they'd be like, okay, well, let's go do something else. Or they would keep things, it was just really minimal on what we were able to say, and if I remember correctly, before they would show up, we were basically told, you don't talk about personal things that go on in the house, and you play with your cousins. That was it. So we were pretty much told, this is the way you're act when they come. And that's just when everybody showed up, it looked like the perfect home. I mean, everything was decorated, like we had, and by all means, my adopted home they were not poor. I would say they were middle class. We were not poor. I mean, so I think that's the other thing too, is that people seem to think it's only poor people, that less educated, I guess you can say, that do stuff like this. And no, that wasn't the case. Not in my adopted home. And they all had good jobs. They all had everything, I wasn't raised poor. I just wasn't. So.
And that goes back to the idea of intuition. Like we've talked about it a couple times on here, that you don't want to insult somebody by like, oh, I really thought that was happening, but I didn't want to make them feel bad by my misjudging, or I didn't want them to do that. But so many times people's intuition really is telling them what is happening. And
right.
Society needs to start listening to that intuition and stop worrying about insulting other people, because okay, yeah, whoops, I was wrong, just kidding. And whatever, like there's so many kids or situations that could be solved and saved by just listening to that voice.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
And everyone just wants to be heard. So even we'll always stress just listening, or even smiling or saying hi and acknowledging somebody, that will change somebody's life and even their day. If they're having a bad day, if you smile or if you even say hi, and knowing that you don't have to judge everybody. And social media has this facade, and then you go outside and then you see a homeless person and you see the unsheltered community, and you automatically think that they're on drugs and that they deserve to be on the corner because they don't want to get a job. And it's like, no, you don't know what they're going through. And it reminds me of even just going to dinner the other night. We went up to Fuddruckers, and there was this lady. She was in a wheelchair and she was hunched over, and she had an amputated leg, and she only had one leg. And so people just walked by her and just like, you could see just looking at the facial expressions of them, like, because she had scabs and everything on her. And so they automatically probably thought, oh, she's a druggie, this and that. So I looked at her and I was like, do you have water? And she's like, no. And you could tell it's like hot. It's humid in Arizona right now. And she's like, no. And she's like, she talked very quiet. And so I was like, basically, I asked her when's the last time she ate, but I couldn't understand her. I just, other than the fact of she was hungry and wanted water. So then, we ended up buying her dinner and we took it out to her. And at first, while they were making her food, I had asked her, what would you like to drink? Maybe she wanted something other than water. So I asked her, what would you like to drink? And she looked at me like, are you serious? And so she's like, just water. So I took her back at water and she just started crying. So like for me, I was like, oh man, like that broke my heart. And then just taking her, I then took her back out dinner. And then when I came back out, she had she had a guy with her. And so he's somebody who protects her in the streets and makes sure she's okay. So I had brought in her food and I was like, oh, now there's two of you. So then I had asked him and he's like, no, it's fine. And so she's like, I don't really have an appetite. So they ended up sharing the burger. And so it's volunteering so much with the unsheltered community. People forget, and even talking with survivors, people forget that no matter what, at the end of the day, especially when you volunteer, you will see life from a different point of view. And when you talk with the unsheltered community and you're volunteering and serving them, they literally are the most loving, peaceful people on the planet. And they have God in their life and they live literally they live, I will say, the American dream. It's not what people see as the American dream, but in their world, they're free. And they are doing what they have to do to make it to the next day. So that right now they're on survival, but they're not sitting there and they're not making people feel sorry for them. They're still making sure they project love no matter what and who approaches them. So that's one thing that I've learned is that they're full of so much love and light, and society makes it seem like don't listen to survivors, don't listen to the homeless people, their voices don't matter. And it's like, no, take a second to listen to them and put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And our world functions off of materialism. So that's one thing I always tell everyone is just listen.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's like you were talking about the homeless, and I don't know, there was a point in time in it was basically around my teenage years, a little past that I was homeless. I think I felt safer like that because nobody was bugging me. I was like, leave me alone. I had been beat down enough. And so I was out on the streets for a while, and I was out just in my eyes, I was free, even though I didn't have the food, even though I didn't have the security, at nighttime, I like just sitting there, just watching the trains, or I like sitting there just watching the sky. And I'll never forget, there was this one time that me and this other girl, we had asked these people for a ride, and their first thing was, how do I know that you're not going to stab us? How do I know that you're not going to, do something bad to us? And they didn't give us a ride, can I blame them for that? No. I mean, how do you know? But it's that assumption that right away, a person that comes up to you like that, I mean, because I'm pretty sure I look scrubby, and I'm pretty sure, I know I hadn't had a shower in a few days. I know my hair was everywhere and I was dirty. So yeah, I mean, it's very easy that judgment is just, it's the first thing that we do.
Yeah.
And
I think too, in this situation that you explained, this has actually happened to me before. And with me having my daughter, and I was like, well, I'd probably be like, yeah, if it was just me, yeah, come on, I'll take you to the next bus stop or whatever, if it was just me. But having my kid in the car, I definitely won't put her in that situation because you never know. So
Yeah.
for me, it was what somebody in this situation can do is we have smartphones, we have every piece of technology in the world. So what I did was I ordered her, and I wouldn't fit them all in my car. She had like 4 kids with her and they were visiting from Canada. And so what I did was I put them in a car. I got them an Uber and I stayed with her until the Uber got there. And I introduced myself to the Uber and I said, I'm sending her, it's on my account. I authorized it because obviously when they pick you up, my face doesn't match the person.
Of course.
So
Yeah.
I was like, I'm ordering the Uber, but can you take him to this place? And then after that, can you make sure that they get home? So I gave her my phone number and I said, if you need a ride back from the grocery store, then let me know and I can get you a bus pass or I can get you an Uber from point A to B so I know that you and your kids made it home safely. So then I gave her my number, and like that goes back to like a situation where I was in Canada. It was the craziest thing, Divine. It's the craziest story, and it just put me in a position of when I was in Canada and I had my daughter and I didn't know where I was going. My phone was dying and situation happened with me and her baby dad. And so basically we're in the middle of Toronto and he left us, didn't know where we were going, nothing. And so I had borrowed somebody else's phone and they got me, they gave me service, or they gave me basically set me up with an Uber, but it just put me in the position of I'm in a whole nother country. I don't know where I'm going, how to get back. My phone's dying. Like I have my kid, it's night, I'm traveling. Like, so it just put me in that mommy panic mode. And so definitely, like, again, use your resources and we have them. So
Yeah.
definitely helping the community. I'll say no matter what, the unsheltered community, they look out for one another and make sure that
Right.
everyone is cared for.
Yes, for sure. Yes, and as a matter of fact, I watch documentaries on all that stuff. It's interesting. It's really, I mean, you don't even have to watch documentaries. It happens right outside our backyard, but it's just, yeah, it's an eye opener. It is. Yes,
Well, it's
for sure.
it's the mentality that just has to change. And I come from, unfortunately, I come from the family that is the why would they be standing on the street? They're just begging for money. That's ridiculous. And I would never give them money. And for me, it's, well, if I have $5 in my wallet and that $5 could go buy them a meal or could go get them on a bus to go somewhere, or could be the last $5 they needed to pay their rent them, or whatever it is that person's doing, then I am giving them my $5 because that's me doing my service. Now, if they take that $5 and they go buy drugs or alcohol or whatever, I still did my part. Whatever they do, that's on them, between them and God and whoever. Like, that's not for me. But you don't know who you're handing that $5 to. You don't know that it isn't somebody who really just needed the last $4.50 to get a bus pass to go visit their mom. You don't know that that was the last meal. They haven't had a meal in 3 days, and this is going to be enough to get them a loaf of bread and peanut butter. Like, you don't know. So stop making the assumption and holding yourself back. And if you're really so incredibly scared of where your $5 whole is going, go buy gift cards then. Buy gift cards and make that they only can go to the gas station. They only can go to McDonald's. They only go wherever. Don't go to McDonald's. So, but like the idea of it's not about you. What are you doing to make the world better? What are you doing to help society? Stop making it about you. Like, I look at my family, we were upper middle class. You could afford $5 freaking to hand to somebody because they need it more than you do.
Right.
That's what they do with it. Stop with the mentality that it's about you. We've really got to start doing, and I get, you cannot help everybody all the time. Bridget and I talk about that all the time. We would love to help everybody all the time. We also have families and things that need to happen, but when you can, you should. and sometimes it doesn't come monetarily. Sometimes it comes with giving of your time, giving of your energy, doing things like that. But that's where society has really lost its way, because we can't just love each other anymore. It's always comes with a stipulation.
Yep.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to give up your Starbucks once a week or eating out once a week to
Right.
help somebody
somebody.
else. Like,
Exactly.
For sure.
So you eventually, obviously you're now here and you're not 18 anymore, and you figured it out. But one of the, none of us are 18, and that's the way it goes. But I don't want to be. But you grew up and you were able to finally find your way. And one of the ways you talk about is that you found it through God. Can you speak to a little bit kind of how that all came about and what happened?
So when I started the deep therapy, the actual therapy that I needed, okay, it wasn't that little pansy therapy that I was doing when I was in foster care. That's the only way I can describe that therapy, because it was so like hit and miss. It was like, do this, do that. But later when I found out what deep therapy was and what you were really supposed to do, you know, they say that when a child is taught about God, that eventually, regardless of how far off track you go, eventually you'll find your way back, okay? I talk about my adopted family. For as much abuse, for as much as everything that they did to us, that is the one thing that they could not destroy. They took us to church. They would sit down, we would sing hymns, they would talk to us about the Bible. I mean, that's one thing that they did, right? So I did turn against God for the longest time. I hated God because of everything that I had been through, and I didn't understand if this is the God that my adopted family would talk to me about, and this is the God that I've heard so much about. Why did he let this happen to me? Why? And I went off of that for years. I mean, I literally, I believed that, you know, I was like, God, you're cruel. This is cruel, right? So when I met my husband, I was 19 years old. Good man. I mean, a good man. And, you know, when your life starts changing and you get a good person in your life that actually like makes you see the type of person that you are, and they love you for who you are, you know, and they love everything about you. I think then you start even seeing past, like you just start seeing, wow, you know what? Life is changing. Like, okay, somebody can love me. Somebody does love me. And actually there was a point though, let me back up for a minute. We had hit that 5-year mark. During that time, I put him through hell, guys. I was terrible with him. I was terrible. I was mean. I was cruel. There was a lot of baggage I carried into my marriage, and I didn't know this, you know. Right. So when he gave me that ultimatum and he said, you need to change or we can't stay together. And now during this time, we had already built a family. Mm-hmm. And I think that's when I started remembering prayer. I started praying, and not to say that I right away fell back into church and did all that. That took a little bit, but I did start praying. And when I started praying, I started going through therapy. I started accepting my husband's love. It was just like this circle that just was like, wait a minute, something is changing. Like my heart is changing, my mind is changing, things are changing. And then eventually I started going to church. Then eventually I started just reading the Bible. I started remembering some of the things that my adopted family would talk about, like as far as the Bible and as far as Christianity. And I think just over time, I just gradually found my way back to God. I just turned it all over to him. I was like, I can't do it. I can't do this alone. And I learned that. I mean, I had to learn that the very hard way, but I did learn that. And not to say that just because I turned my life back over to God and did all that, he has put me through some tests. I mean, and I say, I believe thoroughly that God tests us regardless. He tests our faith. He tests when we sit here and we say, oh, we're going to be, like for instance, I get on Instagram and I do all my talking, or I do my, I talk about my book, and I talk about like everything that I've been through. There's been tests along the way, and he tests to see where you're at. Like, are you really, you say you're going this way, let me see, let me just kind of throw a rock in your way. Now I speak about that because in just 2018, I was diagnosed with cancer. That was a rock that was thrown in my path. Guys, nothing had been going on everything was good. I had published my book. We had moved, things were going good. Boom. This was out of the middle of nowhere. Like there was, and I did a test to see if there's cancer that runs in my family, the hereditary. There's nothing. And the only thing I told my husband, and I will stay firm on this, I believe I was tested because of the fact of where I'm going and what I'm doing. And also, guys, I believe in the devil. I believe that the devil himself he'll come in there and he'll play games with you. He'll try to trick you, and he'll be like,
"Oh, strongest of us, doesn't he?" Mm-hmm.
Oh man. And when I was diagnosed with cancer, my faith even got stronger. I prayed, and I think that I knew that I didn't have to be that person that I was years ago. Now years ago, if this had happened to me, I probably would have just fallen apart, turned to drugs, and but I don't have to be like that anymore. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, so I went from 2018, when I found out 2019, I went through a whole year of chemo and did all of that stuff. And we're talking now 3 years, and I'm good. Yeah. So far I'm good. And so, I think just me changing and wanting that change has just really, and then focusing on God, of course, just bringing him back into my life and saying, I couldn't, and I never have been alone. For as much as I felt like he did turn on me, he didn't. He never did. Mm-hmm. He never did. So yeah, I just, God is real. And that's just that's something I'm not ashamed to say,
Amen.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Yeah.
You'll always hear me say, God will never give you more than you can handle, no matter what. You're tested at times. And for me, there's one thing I will never do is I'll never regret something in life, because for me, it's a test and it was a lesson from God. And he will continue to give you that same test until you pass it. Because you could say, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, but your actions don't match it. And especially for me, like in relationships, it would be a different person, but as you got into that relationship, true colors came out. And so you would see yourself following the same pattern that you said you weren't going to put yourself back in. So for me, it was always like, okay, this is God testing me. Are you really going to do what you said that you shouldn't do, in the path that leads you on? But for me, it's like, I take everything in all of those tests as lessons, and know that God will never give you more than you can handle. And I know that as we went down trafficking, and we've been tested so many times, and we will often say, not today, Satan, like the one podcast where we had the closest connection, 15 minutes. We were all in the same state. And we, of all people, I'm the one recording, and my Wi-Fi just shut out. The one podcast we were talking about, one of the survivors and his testimony, and he was talking about God and how he turned
the Bible.
In the Bible, and how he turned his life around. The one podcast where it was our very first podcast of him really going into the Bible, and he had the Bible out, my internet shut out like completely. And we're like, not today, Satan. So we prayed, we stopped and we prayed, and we have like everything by us to pray during our podcast. But we'll normally start, even like on our calls with the survivors, they will often ask to do a prayer. We pray before, we pray after. So we've turned a lot to the praying as we done the trafficking, more advocating for the trafficking part, especially when it comes to social media and working with the survivors, because the demons don't take a day off. The freaking devil does not take a day off, and they will test you every which way. And there's some days where we're like, I want to jump on and cuss this person out, but it's like, nope, don't feed into that energy. Just keep being the light. So thankfully for us, we have one another, and we all are strong in our faith, and Becky's helped us become stronger in our faith, especially when it comes down to breaking down the Bible and being tested with from the devil and all of that aspect, because we've had moments where we're just like, no, not today. Like, we're not dealing with it.
Yeah, so you speak of the devil, and that's one thing in my adoptive family. I strongly, I mean, there had to have been the demons, you know, and one thing that my adopted mom, I remember I would wake up at night and I'd hear her yelling, and she'd be like, devil, flee, you must flee. And she would go get her Bible. She would sit there and do, you know, a prayer, and she would sit there and say, in the blood of Jesus and all this. But she was so, that the devil was so strong around her, you know, and she would tell us, because there was I don't even know what they were called. It looked like a big red light, and I guess it hung over the TV. It was some old lights, you know.
Yeah, I remember, like, back in the early 80s sort of thing.
And it had a chain.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it has a chain, and you plug it in. Okay.
Yep.
So it used to hang over the TV, and she would say that there was these black things that would just come at her, and because she would be laying on the couch. And that's what she would tell us the next day. Did you hear me yelling? It's because those black things were coming at me. They were coming at me from this light. And then there would be times too, we'd be homeschooling, and we would be sitting in the family room, and we would look over and we'd see the rocking chair that was in the living room.
No.
And you know, as a child, I just would sit there staring at it like,
what? Yeah.
So it was real. I
mean, I feel like
strong.
if you're gonna do that to kids, what she did to you guys, there has to be some level of demon in you. Like, I don't feel like we do that as humans. I don't feel like we do that to our young. As animals, we don't do that to our young. What something is evil is lurking about, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we've also learned to be careful with the people who pray over you. Just because different people and their souls and what trauma or whatnot, their intentions may not be the same as your intentions, even though they use the Bible and God. It's actually sometimes the opposite. So we've been very careful of who we allow to pray with us and pray over us, just because we've had moments where it's like, what the hell, where we've been hit spiritually doing the trafficking piece, and we're like, what is this? Like, what just happened?
Just feel it.
So you can feel it, and then just the whole energy aspect of it. So there's times where you just take that moment, ground, and pray, and then you just have your time with God. And for us three, we've stayed on that front together of, okay, we can all feel it. And so that's one thing too, is just being careful and really just turning to your faith and having faith in God and surrendering, I would say, is don't try to control every situation, or you might not have, we've learned, you might not have the answers or know why this is happening or why this person was brought into your path. And it may just be for a moment where you guys needed to have that human exchange of energy, and really you might have helped that person notice something about themselves where they taught you something about yourself. So really just knowing that there's times where God will eventually give you the answers, and that you don't always get them right up front, and sometimes you will get tested, but just keep your faith and know that there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Amen. Yes.
Amen.
Yes.
And
I agree.
I liked what you said. So I serve at my church for the little kids. I work with the kindergartners and first graders. And one of the director said a couple weeks ago that if you can get to a child by the time they're somewhere around the ages of like 10 to 14, so upwards of that, that if you have taught them about God and the Bible and Jesus and loving and all that sort of stuff, that they will remember it. And like you said, no matter how far off the path they go, at some point they'll come back. And that was me, honestly. I grew up, went to Catholic school. We went to church every weekend. My mom was part of the parish council. We did all the things. I was the good little Catholic girl. Thank God nothing bad happened to me from some of the stories I've heard that happened in the Catholic Church, but nothing bad happened to me. I went off to college. The world got in my way. I ended up with bad anxiety, ended up with autoimmune issues, all of these sorts of things, and found my way back. And so it really is, it wasn't that I was ever truly gone, but it was that now over the last probably year and a half, I've been really strong in my faith. And because of that, people like Bridget and Emma have come onto my path. And we've been able to stand together, and we've been able to just really sit back and discern what's good for us. Why are we here? What are we doing? And then you find, again, Bridget, to your point, like God gives you what you can handle. You don't know what the message is out of what he's giving you. And so I look at you and your struggles in life. And now I see, not that I would ever want a child or a person to go through what you went through, but you get to sit here now and tell other people and be able to say, I'm like, you're not alone. This, you can come out of it. You can survive this. You can do these things. And everybody, again, you're a cancer survivor. And that's another story you get to have, that you don't know who you're going to touch in that day. And Bridget, like you said, you never know who you're going to meet in your path. And one of the things that I really liked was sometimes that person isn't meant for you. You're meant for them.
Yep.
And they need what you have. You don't necessarily need what they have. They need your light. And so just to constantly be that place of love and light, so that they come and they take what they need and then they go on their journey because you've touched them the way that they need to be. They need to move on.
Yes. That's funny that you say that, because that's kind of how I feel about Instagram right now. Okay, so I'm really new to Instagram. Okay, I started
a love-hate relationship with Instagram.
Yeah, it's like I just started it within this last year, and it's interesting. First of all, I'm not very tech savvy, so it's like, I'm learning all this different stuff with it, but the community, the type of people, like you said, there's everybody. I believe that there's groups for everybody. Like everybody isn't going to fit in, to what you're doing or what that person is doing. But the type of people that I've ran into, even though it's just on social media, it's interesting because we all are kind of learning from each other, but then there are some that you can see, oh my goodness, you're going through something that I did years ago. I can help you,
Right.
And so then you can send them hope, you can send them a message, you can talk to them, you can, whatever it is. And so it's just, Instagram is interesting. It's a world in itself. It's
that's actually how we met. So we were following a survivor on Instagram, and we all were part of it. And I started helped start a trafficking rally group in Phoenix. So like we would stand out and do whatever. And another person who lives in Texas knew that I was starting this in Phoenix. Bridget was one of his friends. So he's like, you guys should start talking. Well, ends up Bridget and I live 20 minutes down the street from one another, like literally straight north.
Wow.
And so
oh my goodness,
Bridget was friends with our other friend, Emma. And long story short, a bunch of weird things happened, but it was all based on Instagram. And so the three of us started the Standby Survivors group, and that's how it all worked. And we've never yet met Emma in person. She lives in Vegas. But it all started off of that too.
Yeah.
It's great. I love it and hate it because it doesn't like me, but
yes,
it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a love-hate relationship with social media. It doesn't like us and everything we speak about, but we still do it anyways and use their platforms to the best of our benefit. But really, once all that happened in social media and censorship, I won't say I regret the censorship aspect of it, because even though it's a pain in the ass and we have to fight through it to even get our content seen, One thing it brought us to was all the survivors around the world. We've been able to connect with people in Australia, the UK, Texas, literally all over the world. So that's one thing that we will forever be grateful for, is the community that it's brought to us, because when we got into the trafficking and deeper down the rabbit hole, that was something that was heavy on mine and Emma's hearts. We're like, how can we get involved? How can we help? And then next thing you know, that this is when we were like, well, we wanted to go boots to the ground. How do we get involved? Then that's when we then met Becky, and then it went straight to boots to the ground, and we started the
Wow.
rallies and all of that. And then from there, there's just been so many people in how our podcast has lined up. It's all been organic. And we've looked back and we just reflected on our last couple of podcasts, and we're like, holy cow. And then we got brought to another survivor and someone who was helping with safe houses. And then they were working with someone that we just did a podcast with in our circle that we've been brought into. So just us looking back and reflecting, we're like, we asked God, how can we help? Show us what you want us to do. What is our purpose in all of this? How can we be a light and help the survivors? And then next thing you know, at one point it was just like, I was like, okay, God, like, girls,
Hold
I
up,
need
we're
your help.
good.
Yeah, it was like,
This is overwhelming. Hold on.
it was overwhelming because so
Time out.
many people flooded in, and we're like, for me, I like so much flooded in just because connections to everybody in my mind just was like, oh my gosh, we could do this, this, and this. So trying to connect everyone and be that bridge for everyone, it was just like, okay, we asked to help, and then it got thrown on our lap, and we're like, give us a timeout for a minute, let us process this.
That's
And
right.
then and then it got to a point where now we can reflect back, and we're like, we look back and we're like, the circles and everything that's being brought to us right now on our path is extremely mind-blowing, but we're excited with what the plans are. We don't know what God has in plan for us, but right now we're riding the wave and just really being a light and listening to survivors and helping amplify their voices. So for us, without the technology and social media, it wouldn't have allowed us to meet the survivors and cross so many paths we're crossing now.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the thing now, since COVID, I think a lot has changed, especially with that, yeah, same thing here. I wouldn't have met the group that I've met, the people that I've met. It's amazing. So how long have you folks how long have you been on Instagram doing this?
So I don't even know, to tell you the truth, I don't even know that I had an Instagram pre-COVID. Like,
oh, okay.
I was kind of the Facebook person. That's where everything was. And then COVID hit, and my husband's cousin was like, hey, have you ever seen Fall of Cabal? And I was like, no. And so I watched it, and I was like, what in the hell is going on in this world? Like, what is this? And so then I started posting some of it, and then Facebook, they got mad and they kicked me off. So I can't get on except in a browser. So I don't go on there anymore. So then I was like, I'll go on Instagram. And then I don't even know how I ended up on the page. Like, I watched a video of this survivor, and I was like, oh, I got to start following her. And then we also, like, it was literally, and that's why I think it's so divine, because when you can't even remember how you got to the point you got, it was directed for you. Mm-hmm. And so I think I met Bridget and Emma last December-ish. So it's not even been quite a year. And then we started the Standby Survivors group the beginning of this year. I want to say February, March, something like that. And our concept is that all people have a story. So like, yeah, we started with trafficking, but it may not be trafficking. It could be domestic abuse. It could be childhood trauma. It could be everybody has a story, and everybody has something to say that could help someone else. So that's kind of how we got ours. Our Emma has a podcast called The Imagination. She has done, and I love telling this story, and I know that our listeners have heard it a million times, but I still think it's funny. Because she started back in like February or March, and she's like, oh, we are starting to get like connections to these other survivors. I'm going to just start inviting them to my podcast, and I'll probably do like just a series of 5. I'll call it the Survivor series, and I'll just do like 5 episodes. I think she is upwards of 40 episodes and has had like 25 survivors. So she's repeated some of them, but has had 25 to 30 different survivors on her podcast, and is not stopping anytime soon. Like she weekly has someone new. So it's the same with us. We kind of got to a point where it was, okay, so as parents, like Bridget and I are parents, as parents, how do we deal with this knowledge? Like, how do we protect our kids without wrapping them in bubble wrap and keeping them in the house and not letting the world ever see them? Because the world is evil and this is awful and all these things. And so we kind of were like, who's talking about what do you do as a parent? How do we work this? And so Emma's like, well, you guys should start a podcast. And we're kind of like, no, we don't need to start a podcast. Someone else will start a podcast. Well, that was in April, middle of April was our first episode, and we started the podcast. And I think
You started a podcast.
Uh-huh.
That's great. Yay.
Yeah. And
That's
so we're on,
great.
I think this is week 24 or 25 that we've had. And like Bridget said, we just are so blessed to have people just organically, divinely come to us. And we're able to share our platform with amazing people like you who can tell their story, and somebody out there can hear it, and then they can connect with you, or you can connect with other survivors that we've had on our show, and just different things. The whole idea for us is that circle we have every week just gets one person bigger. And before, it was, when we first started, it was a lot of, this is my circle of influence and this is my circle of influence, and nobody wanted to really let anyone else into their space. And we're like, we don't want to do that, because again, you could have a whole lot of pockets of 10 people, but if you get someone with now 1,000-person circle, people will start listening to your circle. And
Right.
so that's kind of our idea, is to, we're here to help, but we're here to give out our platform to everybody else, because we're I don't want to say we're nobody, but we're not the people who have the story to tell. And so we love that we can invite people to come on and talk about their lives.
Well, it's neat that you folks have done this. I did another one on Adopted just a few weeks ago. I did one on another site too. And I just think it's amazing that there's people out there that, like you said, there's, certain groups for this, certain groups for that. But like with you guys have opened it up to whoever you think, okay, you know what, yeah, this person could help, the group that we have, or whoever it is. You're just kind of opened it up to, you're very open. Yeah. You're very open to what's going on in the world. And fortunately, we're dealing with a lot in our world. We are. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, and two, once I first met Emma, and probably almost maybe 3 years ago, we first were helping with an influencer, and he was doing Army of Love. And so we would literally just go onto whoever was struggling or needed some encouragement for the day. We would all go in and we would get this message from Army of Love, and we would go to their social media page and we would leave the I love you symbol and a heart or a rocket ship. So Emma was one of the main organizers with that, and really helping the social media aspect of it. And so then I loved what she was doing, and I reached out to her and I was like, hey, if you ever need help, like, let me know, I'll help you. So then us two joined of that even before COVID started. And then she started, her original podcast was just telling the truth about the world and world events, and really just speaking about it. And so then once we came in from the trafficking piece, and we went down the trafficking rabbit hole, and once we got deeper into it, and then that's when all the podcasts switched. So then she started her podcast, we got connected to Becky and all of that. So when we had originally talked about it, it was, we want to the censorship block, Emma got one of her pages taken down. And so it was just trying to get survivors on pages as they were hitting censorship. And even Emma being a truth teller, their pages were getting pulled off social media. So it was like, hey, do you need my password to do a live? Like, here, I don't care, have my platform. I'm not really doing anything with it. Use my social media. And so it was really just exchanging our usernames and passwords just so we could get connected to the other side of the world, since social media was shutting us down. And then from there it was like, hey, let's do a podcast and amplify survivors' voices since this is happening to them. And so that's how that all started. And then it just became, we had talked to a survivor from the UK, Samantha Brown, and we saw everything that she was doing. And on one of the very first calls that we ever took, Emma and I, with her, it was, and I think Becky had just started coming into like our whole group at that point. And it was, we wanted to show that the United States and the UK were united. And we wanted to show on the forefront that we stood with the survivors, that this is happening in the US and this is happening in the UK. And really, we were amazed by everything that we learned from the survivors. And we were shocked and mind blown of everything that they taught us. So with all of the information, all the trafficking going on there, we're like, we can't stay silent. Like, there's no way, there's no turning back. And so we're like, screw it, we're jumping into it. We don't know what we're doing, how we're going to do it, but we're doing it. And so once we showed that, once we talked to Sam and her charities and organizations that she's working with, we really just wanted to show that united front. And then next thing you know, it branched out to survivors all over the world reaching out to us. So it's been quite the journey, and we're blessed to speak with survivors like you who can also let other survivors and people know that they're not alone. Because I constantly see it even on Twitter. I ran across a survivor yesterday, and she's like begging for all of these influencers or top people, like, hey, I just want to be heard. And they're tagging them. You constantly see people tagging survivors, tagging the influencers and the celebrities, and no one wants to talk about it. And it's like they can't talk about it because, well, they can, but they choose not to because of their platform and who they're tied to. So yeah, that's really how it all came about.
That's neat. That's awesome. Yeah.
So for any of our listeners or survivors, actually let's separate it. For any of our listeners who are struggling with adversity and really trying to find light at the end of the tunnel and make it through the next day, or even have something to hold on to, whether it's their faith or whatever may give them that peace to make it through the next day, what would be some advice on, just based on your experiences and everything that you've been through, for our listeners who are struggling with adversity?
You've got to fight. I always say that you just got to fight. Like, somehow there's got to be somewhere, somebody, regardless of how much you went through and how much people may have told you were worthless. People may have told you that you weren't meant for anything, that nobody loved you, that whatever it was, there had to have been somebody somewhere that said, you know what, you're going down the wrong path, or you're worth this. Try to remember, like for me, like I said, my adoptive family, for as much as everything that they put us through, the one thing that they did was teach me about God. So there has to be, in everybody's life, there has to have been the one person, even if it was just somebody at a restaurant, even if it was just somebody that sat there and said, oh man, I see that you're a beautiful person, or I see that your hair is pretty, something, somewhere, somebody looked at you like a human being. So try to pull that back and try to just fight, like try to get up every day. And if you really want to change the way you are as a person, it's a constant it's not just one day I'm going to fight and the next day I'm going to give up. You can't do that. It's a constant fight. And it's just, you've got to find that strength inside of you that kept you going when you were going through that trauma. So turn that, make sure that you can turn everything that you are going through, turn it now and just use it for your own ability, because somehow you made it out. What was it? What was it that kept you fighting? Find it and use it. That's your boxing ring. Get it out. Let's go, fight. That's what you got to do. And I think that's what I did. I had to fight, and I really wanted to be a better person. I didn't want to be like my adopted family. As soon as I started going through that deep therapy and I saw how awful, how cruel, and how that's just not the type of person I was made to be, I had to get in my own boxing ring. And that's just what I did. And you've got to fight. I think that's the only way that it's fighting. You literally have to crawl out of that hole that you just have to fight. You have to. If not, it's not, you're going to stay in a pathetic life. Like, you're going to just be this person that you're not really wanting to be. And it's not easy. I mean, I won't even sit here and say it's not easy. It's not. That took years for me to even get to where I'm at. And I'm 48 years old. I mean, not until I was in my early 40s did I even start looking in the mirror, and did I even start looking at myself like I was somebody, like I was a person, like I was worth really loving. So that took a long time,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Definitely. And it takes a lot of courage. What people don't realize is survivors who constantly are being vulnerable and opening up to the world and sharing their stories, especially in a time like we're in right now. In reality of the world is trafficking is new to a lot of people, and it's the first time that they're hearing about it. So just know that if you're barely hearing about trafficking and you're learning about it, please be open-minded, be mindful of what you're projecting out, and especially onto the survivors. We will defend the survivors because so many people bash them and want to discredit them. And it's like, no, where are your celebrities? Where are your politicians? Where are all these people in high places speaking out or defending the children, defending the survivors? It's like, this could have been stopped a while ago. It's gone on for way too long, and so many generations have suffered. And we're in this nasty trauma bond with our own government. And it's like, it's time to break the chain, break free from it all, and really turn to your survivors. Even if it's saying, I see you, I hear you, I stand by you. You're not alone. We're in here fighting with you. Make sure to even reach out to survivors and let them know you're thinking of them or praying for them. You will never understand how much that means to a survivor, because they're fighting something every day as they continue to heal, especially in the crucial time that we're in right now. This is not something, even you guys jumping on podcasts with us, some survivors, it takes a week, 2 weeks to even recoup from, especially as we even get into the satanic ritual abuse. Some of those interviews and some of those podcasts and open conversations really does still affect the survivor, and they live this life every day. So really just be mindful. Going off of that, for survivors, anyone listening that is a survivor, especially if you're in dealing with foster care or CPS, anything like that, I'm going to call you a survivor, even if you're going through it right now, because you are fighting and you are trying to get out of the struggle and everything that you're going through. So any of the survivors listening, what would be some advice as far as, based on your experience again, how you've dealt with adversity, especially speaking your truth and sharing your story and opening up to the world in social media?
Is that for me?
Yeah.
Is that question for me? Okay. All right.
Sorry.
So now, okay, so like I can bring it back to how I was saying that when I did get onto social media, it just kind of fell into my lap, right? I mean, things didn't, I don't know, me getting onto social media and actually sharing my story has just really been, I think it's still, okay, so I tell you, yeah, I healed, I did, but I still think it's part of healing. I still think it's part of, now you're just helping somebody else just kind of heal along with you, instead of, and you're kind of showing them, hey, this is how you can grow. This is how you can talk about your trauma. You can talk about it and it's okay. It's okay to talk about it. And, I don't know, it's just, I mean, as far as being a survivor, it's just, I think it's mind blowing, right? That you can go through stuff like that and just kind of be able to talk about it. I mean, now I don't break down about it, now I don't sit here and bawl about it, but years ago, I mean, I used to, so I know like that like I have healed, I have healed in that aspect. And I think, like you said, it's every day you have to continuously just remind yourself, it's like just steps, and it's constant steps, so yeah.
Yeah. So for those survivors, or even those folks out there that are struggling now, know that someone who's been, I'll say, out of it in quotes for a couple of decades still struggles. Like I don't want people, a lot of people see some of our survivors that are on here or different people on Instagram and they think every day is great. It's not.
Yeah.
None of us have great days. And we have to remember that, it's just the decision that today, if all I can do is get up and make myself breakfast, then that's all I did today. And that was good enough because I was still here and living my life. And then some days you can get up and run around the block, and some days you can go shopping and do all the things, and just different days are different. And so just to remind the folks listening that, it's not perfect. Nobody's perfect. No situation is perfect. And that it does take effort every day. And even though you hear some of these survivors who have learned through it and gone through it, take that as a hope, take that as a positive, that that there's a place you can get. Don't take it as I'm supposed to be there right now.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a great conversation, and I hope those of you listening will consider hopping on Amazon and picking up the book, because it really, really is. It's a shorter book. It's an easy read, but it's an amazing, amazing story, and it's absolutely worth it. So please support Neli and helping get her story out there, because it's what the world needs. We need to start telling these stories, as we say weekly on our podcast. So we will put that link in our show notes. And again, we'll put any social media. We'll get all of that. We're talking about Instagram. We'll get that name out there if you want to connect with her and see all the awesome things she's doing. You'll see her working out and doing all that stuff. I need to start taking pointers on that one. I'm going to start watching you in your daily workouts because it's awesome.
So that's one thing too. So my working out, that's also been another step that I'm kind of,
that's a good point.
You've got, not only do you have to like take care of yourself, but you got to take care of yourself physically too. You've got to, and I think a lot of that too came when I had gotten cancer. So again, healing from that, it's just, and life is just a lesson. It's a teacher, and it's like you just constantly find something to make yourself better and better, And yeah, I do. I follow Fitness with PJ. I'm telling you, she is, wow, she's intense. Yeah.
We'll link that one
good.
too.
Okay. Yeah, she would love that. And she's out from Canada. Yeah, she's awesome. Yeah.
I say maybe we need to get her on, Bridget, so we can have have her talk about the health side of things and how we all get rid
Yes,
of our
that would
COVID-19.
be awesome.
Definitely. Would love to. So we'll get that information from you. We'll make sure to link it in the show notes. As
Okay.
As always, survivors, we see you, we hear you, we stand by you. You are not alone. You are enough. You are loved. We're sending love, light, and blessings to everyone. Again, know that you're not alone. If you need anything, if you need someone to reach out to, talk to, know that you can reach out to any of us three. All of our information will be in the show notes as well. So again, as always, thank you for your love and support and sending love, light, and blessings.